She refused his dance. The Duke cleared the ballroom. "Now you have no choice, my lady." The Hartwell Ball was, by universal agreement, the most anticipated event of the London season, and Lady Eliza Whitmore had spent the better part of 2 hours perfecting the art of invisibility against its silk-papered walls. It was a skill she had cultivated with considerable dedication over the past 3 years, the precise angle at which to hold one's fan to obscure one's face without appearing to hide, the exact shade of gown that would neither attract attention nor invite pity, the careful positioning near potted palms and marble columns that allowed one to observe without being observed. Tonight she wore dove-grey silk, a colour that had once made her mother weep with its dullness, but which Eliza had come to appreciate for its remarkable ability to render her nearly invisible against the silver damask wallpaper. From her carefully chosen vantage point near the refreshment table, she watched the dancers whirl past in a kaleidoscope of white muslin and coloured silk, their faces flushed with champagne and the particular excitement that came from being young, beautiful, and desired. She remembered that feeling. It seemed a lifetime ago now, though it had been only 3 years since she had danced at balls like this one, since gentlemen had written their names in her dance card, and her father had watched from the card-room with proud, indulgent eyes. Her father. Even now, the thought of him brought a complicated twist of grief and anger that she had never quite learned to untangle. She had loved him desperately, wholly, with a daughter's blind devotion, and he had gambled away everything, including her future, before putting a pistol to his temple and leaving her to face the wreckage alone. "Eliza!" Her aunt's voice cut through her reverie like a blade through butter. "Stop wool-gathering and fetch me a glass of lemonade, and for heaven's sake stand up straight. You look like a wilted flower." Lady Pemberton was a woman of formidable reputation, and even more formidable opinions, all of which she shared freely and frequently. She had taken Eliza in after the scandal not out of affection. Lady Pemberton had disapproved of her younger brother's marriage to a woman of merely respectable family, and had never quite forgiven him for dying before she could say, "I told you so," but out of a grim sense of duty, and an even grimmer awareness of what society would say if she turned her own niece out into the street. "Yes, Aunt." Eliza kept her voice carefully neutral as she moved toward the lemonade table. She had learned that lesson early in her residence at Pemberton House. Any display of spirit, any hint of the wit and warmth that had once made her the toast of 3 counties, was met with swift and cutting correction. Gratitude, her aunt reminded her daily, should make one humble. And humility, apparently, required silence. She was pouring a glass of lemonade with practiced steadiness when the ballroom doors opened and the world seemed to hold its breath. Eliza looked up, as did everyone else in the room, to see what, or rather who, had commanded such immediate attention, and even she, armoured as she was in invisibility and resignation, felt her heart stutter. Sebastian Ashworth, the Duke of Thornfield, stood in the doorway like a dark angel surveying his domain. He was tall, taller than any man had a right to be, with shoulders that spoke of physical power, barely contained by the exquisite tailoring of his black evening coat. His hair was coal dark, swept back from a face of such aristocratic severity that it might have been carved from marble. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth set in a line of habitual command. But it was his eyes that made the breath catch in Eliza's throat. Even from across the ballroom she could see they were the colour of storm clouds, grey and silver and darkly luminous, sweeping across the assembled company with an expression of such complete indifference that it bordered on contempt. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Thornfield, I didn't think he would come. They say he ruined Lord Ashby last month. Completely. The man has fled to the continent." "My dear, he is worth 40,000 a year at least." perhaps 50. Cold as ice, though. They say he has never danced with a woman he did not choose himself, and the women he chooses do not refuse. Eliza watched him descend the 3 steps into the ballroom proper, watched the crowd part before him like the Red Sea before Moses. There was something almost hypnotic about his presence, a magnetic pull that seemed to draw every eye in the room. Even the orchestra seemed to play more quietly, as if the music itself was afraid to compete for attention. He moved through the room with the easy confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. Lords bowed, ladies curtsied, ambitious mothers thrust their daughters forward with desperate smiles, and Thornfield acknowledged them all with the same cool nod, the same distant courtesy that made clear they were beneath his notice. Eliza turned back to the lemonade, her heart beating rather faster than she would have liked. She had heard stories about the Duke of Thornfield, of course. Everyone had. He was said to be brilliant and ruthless, a man who had taken his father's considerable fortune and doubled it through investments and political maneuvering that left his rivals bewildered and often bankrupt. He was said to have no heart, no warmth, no capacity for human connection. He was said to be looking for a duchess, though the standards he set were so impossibly high that no woman had yet met them. He was said to be the most dangerous man in England, and Eliza wanted nothing more than to escape his notice entirely. She was not a player in the marriage mart any more. She was barely a spectator. Men like Thornfield did not look at women like her, fallen, disgraced, dependent on the charity of relations who made certain everyone knew exactly how generous they were being. She was safe in her invisibility, or so she thought. Lady Whitmore. The voice was silk over steel, and it came from directly behind her. Eliza turned, her glass of lemonade clutched like a shield, and found herself face to face with Lady Venetia Sinclair, a wealthy widow of uncertain age and undeniable beauty, who had been, according to the gossip Eliza could not help but overhear, the Duke of Thornfield's mistress until quite recently. Lady Sinclair was examining her with the sort of cool assessment one might give a horse one was considering not purchasing. Her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I thought it was you," Lady Sinclair said, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the ears of the 3 matrons standing nearby. "I almost didn't recognize you. You've become so diminished since your father's unfortunate end. How kind of Lady Pemberton to let you appear in public. I'm sure it must be such a comfort after everything to watch others dance while you—" She let the sentence trail off, the implication hanging in the air like poison. Eliza felt her cheeks flame. This was not new. She had endured such cuts before, many times, from women who had once called her friend and now delighted in her fall. She had learned to absorb them in silence, to bow her head and murmur something appropriately humble, to give no satisfaction to those who wished to see her wounded. But tonight, something was different. Perhaps it was the music, achingly beautiful and utterly inaccessible. Perhaps it was the memory of her father, who had loved her even as he destroyed her. Perhaps it was simply that she had reached the limit of what her spirit could bear. Whatever the cause, Eliza heard herself speak before she could stop the words. "How generous of you to concern yourself with my circumstances, Lady Sinclair," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Though I confess I'm surprised you find time to notice me at all, given how occupied you must be these days finding a new protector. I mean, since your previous arrangement seems to have concluded." The words fell into a sudden, terrible silence. Lady Sinclair's face went white, then red, her carefully maintained composure cracking like ice on a spring pond. The matrons nearby gasped audibly, and Eliza, realizing what she had done, felt her stomach drop to somewhere around her knees. She had just publicly acknowledged Lady Sinclair's affair with Thornfield. She had just committed social suicide in front of 3 of the most prolific gossips in London. She had just— "That," said a deep voice from behind her, rich with dark amusement, was magnificently done. Eliza spun around, her heart hammering, and found herself looking up into the storm-grey eyes of the Duke of Thornfield himself. He was even more devastating at close range. This near, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the cool intelligence in his gaze as he regarded her with what appeared to be genuine interest. He was close enough that she could smell him sandalwood and something darker, something that made her think of midnight and danger, and all the things a well-bred lady should not contemplate. "Your Grace," she managed, dropping into a curtsy that was only slightly unsteady. I did not see you there." "Clearly." His lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "If you had, I suspect you might have tempered your remarks. Or perhaps not. You have the look of a woman who has stopped caring what others think of her." Eliza opened her mouth to deny it, to apologize, to say anything that might repair the damage she had done. But before she could speak, Thornfield did something that made every head in the ballroom turn and every conversation stop. He extended his hand to her. "Dance with me," he said. It was not a question. The silence that followed was so complete that Eliza could hear the candle flames flickering in the chandeliers above. She was aware with excruciating clarity of every eye in the room fixed upon her, the matrons frozen in shock, Lady Sinclair nearly vibrating with fury, her aunt's face a mask of stunned disbelief across the ballroom. The Duke of Thornfield, the most eligible man in England, was asking her to dance. Her, Eliza Whitmore, the disgraced daughter of a bankrupt earl who had killed himself rather than face his creditors. The poor relation who existed on charity and was supposed to be invisible. She knew what she should do. She should accept, gracefully and gratefully, and allow herself to be led onto the floor by the most powerful man in the room. It would not restore her reputation. Nothing could do that, but it would provide a moment of reprieve, a brief reminder of what she had once been before everything fell apart. Any woman in this room would sell her soul for what he was offering. And yet, looking up into those cool grey eyes, Eliza saw something that made her blood run cold. He was not asking her because he found her interesting or attractive or worthy of his attention. He was asking her because she had amused him, because her sharp tongue and disregard for consequences had provided a moment's entertainment in what was clearly a tedious evening. She was a curiosity, a novelty, a toy to be played with and discarded when a more interesting diversion presented itself. She thought of her father, who had gambled everything on the turn of a card and lost. She thought of her former fiancé, who had looked at her with something like love, right up until the moment he learned her dowry was forfeit and her name was tarnished. She thought of every man who had ever seen her as something to be used for her fortune, for her connections, for her beauty, and never as a person in her own right. And Lady Eliza Whitmore, who had spent 3 years learning to be silent and grateful and invisible, looked the Duke of Thornfield directly in the eye and said, "No." The word seemed to echo in the silence. Thornfield's brow lifted by perhaps 1/4 of an inch. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no, Your Grace." Her voice was steadier than she would have believed possible, though her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "I thank you for the honor, but I do not wish to dance." The murmurs started then, a rising tide of shock and scandal that rippled outward from where they stood. Eliza could feel her aunt's fury from across the room, could see the gleeful horror on Lady Sinclair's face, could practically hear the gossip that would spread through London like wildfire before the night was out. Lady Whitmore refused the Duke of Thornfield, publicly, in front of everyone. She had done it now. Whatever slim chance she might have had of one day rebuilding her reputation, of finding some respectable position as a companion or governess, of escaping her aunt's bitter charity, it was gone. She had committed the unforgivable sin of refusing the most powerful man in England, and society would never forgive her for it. But as she stood there, trembling slightly but refusing to look away, she felt something she had not felt in 3 years. She felt free. Thornfield studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth curved upward. "How extraordinary," he murmured, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "I don't believe anyone has ever said no to me before." "Then perhaps," Eliza replied, matching his low tone, "it is past time someone did." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or something darker and more dangerous. He held her gaze for another heartbeat, 2, and then he turned and walked away without another word. Eliza let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. It was over. She had survived. Now she just needed to endure whatever punishment awaited her from her aunt, pack her meager belongings, and figure out how to survive on the streets, because surely, after tonight, even Lady Pemberton would not. The music stopped. It was so sudden, so unexpected, that for a moment Eliza thought something had happened to the orchestra, an illness, an accident, a fire perhaps. But when she looked toward the musicians' gallery, she saw them setting down their instruments with expressions of bewildered compliance, following the instructions of a livid footman who had appeared from nowhere. And then Lord Hartwell, their host, was stepping onto the raised platform where the orchestra sat. His face a complicated mixture of confusion and what appeared to be genuine fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom, "I regret to inform you that the evening's entertainment has concluded. Carriages are being called. I trust you will all understand that circumstances beyond my control, that is to say—" He trailed off, glancing toward the corner of the room where the Duke of Thornfield stood with his arms crossed over his chest, watching the chaos unfold with an expression of cool satisfaction. The room erupted. Guests protested, demanded explanations, refused to leave. But the footmen were everywhere now, politely but firmly escorting people toward the doors, fetching wraps and cloaks and walking sticks with an efficiency that brooked no argument. Within minutes the glittering crowd was flowing toward the exits. 300 of London's finest, forced out into the night by the will of a single man. Eliza tried to move with them, tried to find her aunt in the chaos, but a firm hand on her elbow stopped her in her tracks. "Not you," said a footman she did not recognize, his face impassive. "His Grace requests that you remain." "His Grace can make his requests to someone who—" But her aunt was there suddenly, her face white with fury and what might have been terror. "You will stay," Lady Pemberton hissed, her fingers digging into Eliza's other arm. "You will stay, and you will do whatever he asks, and perhaps we can salvage something from this disaster you have created." "Aunt, do not speak to me." Lady Pemberton's voice shook with rage. "Do not ever speak to me again. After tonight, you are no longer my concern. Whatever happens now, you have brought upon yourself." And then she was gone, swept away with the rest of the guests, and Eliza was alone. Or rather, she was not alone at all. The ballroom emptied with remarkable speed. Within perhaps 10 minutes, the last guest had been ushered out, the last protest quelled, the great doors closed against the night. The servants retreated to the shadows. The candles guttered in their sconces, casting dancing shadows across the parquet floor. And Lady Eliza Whitmore stood in the centre of the most beautiful ballroom in London, entirely alone except for the Duke of Thornfield, who was walking toward her with the unhurried pace of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. "Now then," he said, stopping perhaps 3 feet from where she stood frozen. "Shall we try that again?" "Try what again?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You asked me to dance. I refused. The conversation would seem to be concluded. And yet here we are." He gestured at the empty room around them, the abandoned champagne glasses, the wilted flowers, the musicians' gallery dark and silent. "Just the two of us. No audience to perform for. No scandal to court." His eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "Now you have no choice, my lady." Eliza felt a surge of something that might have been fear or might have been fury. "You cleared an entire ballroom because I refused to dance with you?" "I cleared an entire ballroom because I wished to have a conversation with you, and I prefer to conduct my conversations without 300 eavesdroppers." "That is the most arrogant thing I have ever heard." "I am the most arrogant man you have ever met." He said it without pride, without shame, as a simple statement of fact. "Now, you refused my invitation. I would like to know why." Eliza stared at him. In the flickering candlelight, with the shadows playing across the sharp planes of his face, he looked less like an aristocrat and more like something out of a Gothic novel. The villain, perhaps, or the brooding hero whose dark past would eventually be revealed to hide a wounded heart. Except this was real life, not a novel. And the Duke of Thornfield was not a character she could close between covers and set aside. "Does it matter?" she asked. "You are the Duke of Thornfield. I am nobody. Whatever my reasons, they cannot possibly be of interest to you." "And yet they are." He took a step closer, and she had to fight the urge to step back. "In the past decade, I have asked perhaps a dozen women to dance. Not one of them has ever refused me. Not one of them has ever looked at me the way you did, as though I were offering an insult rather than an honor. I find myself curious. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Your Grace. So I have been told." Another step, and now he was close enough that she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes that might have been amusement or might have been something else entirely. "Tell me why. The truth, and I will let you leave." Eliza knew she should lie. She should make some excuse, a headache, a prior commitment, a religious objection to waltzes, something that would allow her to escape this situation with some shred of dignity intact. But she was so tired of lying, so tired of pretending, so tired of being small and silent and grateful for crumbs from tables she had once sat at as an honored guest. "You want the truth?" She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Very well. I refused because I am tired, Your Grace. Tired of being a pawn in games I did not choose to play. Tired of being invisible until someone decides I might be useful. Tired of having my worth measured by men who see only what I lack: fortune, family, prospects, and never what I am." She drew a breath, aware that she was trembling but unable to stop herself. "You asked me to dance because I amused you, because I said something clever and you thought it might be entertaining to toy with the poor relation for a few minutes before moving on to worthier pursuits. I am not a toy. I am not a novelty. I am not a momentary distraction for a bored duke who has never been told no." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. "If I am to be ruined, and I am, after tonight, thoroughly and completely ruined, then I will be ruined on my own terms, not yours." Silence fell between them, heavy and absolute. Thornfield regarded her with an expression she could not read, his storm-grey eyes dark and intent, his sculpted features giving nothing away. For a long moment he simply looked at her, and Eliza had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years. Then, slowly, he began to applaud. It was a slow, sardonic clap, but there was something genuine beneath the mockery. A respect, perhaps, or at least a recognition. "Magnificent," he said. "Truly magnificent. I was wrong about you." "Wrong?" "I thought you had simply lost your temper with Lady Sinclair. A momentary lapse. But this is something else entirely. This is a woman who has stopped pretending." Eliza did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "You are correct, of course," he continued, beginning to circle her slowly like a wolf assessing its prey. "You are ruined after tonight. Your aunt has publicly disowned you. The gossip has already begun to spread. By tomorrow morning, there will not be a drawing-room in London that is not discussing the girl who refused the Duke of Thornfield and paid the price." "I am aware." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "But you are wrong about one thing." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body through the thin silk of her gown. "I did not ask you to dance because you amused me. I asked because you interested me. There is a difference." "I fail to see—" "Lady Sinclair was my mistress," he said bluntly. "I ended the arrangement 3 weeks ago because she bored me. She has spent every social event since then attempting to win back my favor through various tiresome machinations. When you put her in her place so neatly, I was impressed. And I am not easily impressed." Eliza felt her cheeks heat. "I should not have spoken to her that way. It was—" "Honest," he interrupted. "It was honest. Do you know how rarely I encounter honesty, Lady Whitmore? How often I am surrounded by sycophants and social climbers who tell me only what they think I wish to hear." He shook his head slowly. "You are the first person in years who has spoken to me as though I were simply a man rather than a title to be courted or a fortune to be secured." "That is because you are simply a man," Eliza said, and then immediately wished she could take the words back. One did not tell a duke that he was simply anything. But Thornfield laughed a genuine sound, rich and warm and startling in its unexpectedness. "There it is again. That remarkable honesty." His eyes gleamed. "I have a proposition for you." "I am not interested in becoming your mistress, Your Grace. I am not offering—" He waved a dismissive hand. "I have no need of a mistress. What I need is considerably more complicated, and considerably more valuable." Despite herself, Eliza felt a flicker of curiosity. What could I possibly offer that the Duke of Thornfield could not acquire elsewhere? "Next month I am hosting a house party at my country estate, a gathering of political allies, business rivals, and various social luminaries whose support I require for certain projects I am undertaking. It is essential that the event run smoothly, that my guests are charmed and entertained and favorably disposed toward my interests. I still fail to see—" "A house party of that magnitude requires a hostess," he said. "A woman who can manage the household, smooth over conflicts, ensure that the right people are seated together and the wrong people are kept apart. A woman who understands society's rules well enough to navigate them with grace. A woman who is intelligent, observant, and most importantly honest enough to tell me the truth rather than what I wish to hear." Eliza stared at him. "You are asking me to play hostess at your house party?" "I am asking you to play duchess for 3 weeks." His voice was soft, almost intimate. "To manage my household, charm my guests, and help me secure the political alliances I need. In return, I will use every ounce of my considerable influence to restore your reputation. By the time the house party concludes, you will be received in every drawing-room in London. I will personally ensure that you receive invitations to every event of note for the remainder of the season. I will make it known that you are under my protection." "Your protection?" Eliza's voice was flat. And what, precisely, would that protection entail? Nothing untoward, I assure you. You would have your own suite of rooms, your own maid, your own schedule. You would be treated with complete respect by my staff and my guests. The only intimacy required would be the appearance of friendship between us, enough to make clear that any insult to you is an insult to me. It was madness, complete and utter madness. She could not possibly agree to spend 3 weeks in the home of a man she had just met, playing a role she was in no way qualified to play, trusting that he would keep his word about her reputation when he had every reason to. Why? She asked. Why me? You could have any woman in London to play this role. Women with actual connections, actual influence, actual willingness to tell me the truth. He raised an eyebrow. I think not. Every woman who has ever angled for my attention has done so with an eye to becoming the Duchess of Thornfield in reality, not merely in appearance. They would tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. They would flatter and simper and scheme. His lip curled slightly. You, on the other hand, told me that I was simply a man. You refused to dance with me because you did not wish to be a pawn. You are utterly unimpressed by my title and my fortune. I am very impressed by your arrogance, Eliza muttered. You see, that is precisely what I need. Someone who will tell me when I am being an arrogant fool, rather than agreeing with my every pronouncement. He extended his hand, just as he had done earlier, but this time there was something different in his expression, something almost like respect. 3 weeks, Lady Whitmore. 3 weeks of playing a role, and I will give you back everything you have lost. Your reputation, your place in society, your future. Eliza looked at his hand, at the long fingers and the signet ring glinting in the candlelight. She thought of her aunt's face, white with fury. She thought of the streets of London, cold and unforgiving for a woman with no money and no connections. She thought of her father, who had gambled everything on a single throw of the dice. But this was not gambling, was it? This was a calculated risk, a business arrangement, a transaction in which both parties stood to benefit. And beneath all the practical considerations, there was something else. Something that made her blood quicken and her pulse race. The Duke of Thornfield was offering her something no one had offered in 3 years, a way out, a choice, power over her own destiny. She reached out and placed her hand in his. "Very well," she said, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "I accept your proposition, Your Grace, but I want to make one thing absolutely clear." His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and unexpectedly gentle. "And what is that?" Eliza met his storm-grey eyes without flinching. "I am accepting your offer because it serves my interests, not because I am impressed by you or grateful to you, or in any way swayed by your title or your fortune. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. I would expect nothing less. And if you attempt to take advantage of our situation in any way, if you expect anything from me beyond the terms we have agreed, I will walk away without a backward glance. Reputation be damned. You have my word." "Your word." She laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Forgive me if I do not immediately place my faith in the word of a man who cleared an entire ballroom simply because he did not receive the answer he wanted." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or admiration. "You are right not to trust me. I am not a trustworthy man. I am ruthless, selfish, and entirely accustomed to getting what I want." He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel his breath warm against her cheek. "But I am also a man who keeps his bargains. 3 weeks, Lady Whitmore. 3 weeks of your time and your talent. And in exchange, I will give you back your life." He released her hand and stepped back, the sudden distance between them leaving her strangely bereft. "My carriage will call for you tomorrow at 10, he said, his voice returning to its usual cool authority. "Pack everything you own. You will not be returning to your aunt's house." "I have almost nothing to pack," Eliza admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "Everything I owned was sold to pay my father's debts." "Then we will remedy that as well." He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her over his shoulder. "One more thing, Lady Whitmore." "Yes?" "That dance you refused me." A faint smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Before the house party is over, you will give it to me willingly. I promise you that." And, before she could respond, he was gone, the great doors swinging shut behind him with a sound like fate sealing itself. Eliza stood alone in the empty ballroom, surrounded by guttering candles and abandoned champagne glasses, and the faint echo of music that had stopped playing hours ago. Her hand still tingled where he had held it. Her heart still raced from the audacity of what she had agreed to. She had spent 3 years learning to be invisible, to want nothing, to expect nothing. And in a single evening the Duke of Thornfield had torn away every defense she had built and offered her something she had never dared to hope for: a second chance. The candles flickered, and somewhere in the vast house a clock chimed midnight. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would leave behind the grey existence she had accepted and step into a world of politics and intrigue and a man whose storm-grey eyes seemed to see straight through her. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And as Eliza gathered her thin wrap and walked toward the doors, she realized that for the first time in 3 years she felt something she had thought lost forever: hope. Thornfield Manor rose from the Devonshire countryside like a cathedral of stone and ambition, its towers and turrets reaching toward a sky the color of pewter. Eliza pressed her face to the carriage window as they approached, watching the great house grow larger with each turn of the wheels, and felt her courage begin to falter. The journey from London had taken 2 days, with a night spent at a respectable inn, where Sebastian she could not quite bring herself to call him by his Christian name, even in her thoughts. Though he had insisted upon, it had secured her a private room and ordered a dinner so lavish that she had barely touched half of it. He had been the perfect gentleman throughout, keeping a careful distance, speaking to her only of practical matters, the guests who would be attending, the political alliances at stake, the household staff she would be managing. And yet, there had been moments: a brush of fingers when he handed her down from the carriage, a look that lingered too long across the dining table, a softening in his voice when he spoke of Thornfield, his ancestral home, that suggested depths beneath his carefully maintained coldness. Eliza had told herself it meant nothing. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. But as the carriage swept up the long gravel drive and the full magnificence of Thornfield Manor came into view, she felt suddenly, terrifyingly aware of what she had agreed to. 3 weeks in this man's home, playing a role she was not remotely qualified to play, surrounded by political rivals and society luminaries who would be watching her every move. What had she been thinking? The carriage rolled to a stop before the great front doors, and before Eliza could compose herself, they were flung open by a footman in immaculate livery. Sebastian emerged from the second carriage. He had insisted on travelling separately for propriety's sake, and was at her side before she could step down. "Welcome to Thornfield," he said, offering his hand. She took it, feeling the warmth of his fingers through her thin gloves, and allowed him to help her descend. The gravel crunched beneath her boots as she looked up at the facade of his ancestral home. It was beautiful, she had to admit. Beautiful in the way that a glacier was beautiful, or a mountain, or any other force of nature that could destroy as easily as it inspired awe. The pale stone glowed softly in the afternoon light, and the windows, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, reflected the clouded sky like watchful eyes. "It's magnificent," she said, because she could think of nothing else to say. "It's cold," Sebastian's voice was flat and drafty and absurdly expensive to maintain, and filled with the ghosts of ancestors who would undoubtedly disapprove of everything I've done with my life. But it is home, such as it is. There was something in his tone that made her look at him more closely. The sardonic mask was firmly in place, but beneath it she thought she detected something else. Something almost like pain. Before she could respond, the front doors opened and a small army of servants spilled out, lining up on either side of the entrance like soldiers awaiting inspection. At their head stood a woman of perhaps 50, grey-haired and stern-faced, in a black dress that seemed to absorb what little warmth the day offered. "Lady Whitmore," Sebastian said. "May I present Mrs. Blackwood, Thornfield's housekeeper. She has been with the estate since before I was born and knows its workings better than anyone alive. Anything you need, she will provide." Mrs. Blackwood dropped a curtsy that was perfectly correct and somehow still managed to convey skepticism. "My lady, welcome to Thornfield Manor." "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. I look forward to working with you." The housekeeper's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. Clearly she had not expected courtesy from whatever light skirt she assumed Sebastian had brought home. But she recovered quickly, her expression smoothing into professional blankness. "I have prepared the rose suite for Lady Whitmore, Your Grace," she said, addressing Sebastian, "as you instructed. Will you be requiring anything else before the guests arrive? Show Lady Whitmore to her rooms and ensure she has everything she needs. She will be acting as hostess for the house party, and I expect every member of this staff to treat her with the same respect they would show a duchess." A ripple passed through the assembled servants, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough. Eliza felt her cheeks warm. They thought her his mistress. Of course they did. What other explanation could there be for a disgraced woman taking up residence in the home of the most eligible bachelor in England? But Sebastian was already moving toward the doors, leaving her to follow in his wake, and there was nothing to do but lift her chin and pretend she did not notice the whispers. The interior of Thornfield was, if anything, more impressive than its exterior. The entrance hall alone could have contained her aunt's entire townhouse, its vaulted ceilings soaring overhead like the inside of a cathedral. Marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, and a grand staircase swept upward in a graceful curve, its balustrade carved with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. But for all its grandeur, there was something cold about the space. The furniture was magnificent, but uninviting. The portraits on the walls depicted stern-faced ancestors who seemed to glare down at Eliza with disapproval. And there were no flowers, no personal touches, nothing to suggest that anyone actually lived here rather than merely existed within these walls. It was a house, Eliza thought, but it was not a home. Sebastian paused at the foot of the staircase. "I have business to attend to before dinner, but I will send someone to escort you to the dining room at 8. In the meantime, I suggest you rest and familiarize yourself with the house. Mrs. Blackwood will answer any questions you may have." "Of course." Eliza hesitated, then added, "Sebastian." His name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate, too personal for the careful distance they had maintained. But he had asked her to use it, and she was nothing if not a woman who kept her bargains. He paused, looking back at her with an expression she could not read. "Yes? Thank you for all of this. I know I have given you little reason to help me, and yet—" "This is a business arrangement," he interrupted, his voice cooling. "Nothing more. You are providing a service, and I am paying for it. Gratitude is unnecessary." And with that he was gone, his long strides carrying him through a door at the far end of the hall before she could respond. Eliza stood alone in the vast entrance hall, surrounded by the cold magnificence of Thornfield Manor, and wondered what she had gotten herself into. The Rose Suite was aptly named, Pink silk covered the walls, and the furniture was upholstered in varying shades of rose and cream. A fire crackled in the hearth, and fresh flowers, the first she had seen in the house, sat in a crystal vase on the dressing table. It was beautiful. It was welcoming. It was so completely at odds with the cold grandeur of the rest of the house that Eliza could only stare in bewildered silence. "His Grace had these rooms prepared specifically for your visit, my lady," said the maid who had been assigned to her, a young woman named Sarah, with kind eyes and a soft Scottish burr. "He ordered the flowers himself. Said you might like something cheerful after your journey." Eliza touched the petals of a pink rose, soft as velvet, beneath her fingers. It was such a small thing, such a seemingly insignificant gesture. And yet, he had thought of her comfort. He had anticipated what might please her. He had, against all evidence, shown something that looked almost like kindness. "The guests begin arriving tomorrow," Sarah continued, bustling about the room and unpacking the new wardrobe Sebastian had purchased for Eliza in London. "The Duke has invited quite a company. Lords and ladies, politicians and their wives. Even Lord Hartley, they say, though he and his Grace are known rivals." Lord Hartley? The name sparked a memory something unpleasant, though Eliza could not quite place it. "Aye, my lady. They say he knew your father, the late Earl, though I'm sure I shouldn't gossip." The late Earl, her father. A cold weight settled in Eliza's stomach as the memory surfaced. Lord Hartley had been one of her father's creditors, one of the men who had circled like vultures after his death, picking over the bones of the Ashbury estate. She had met him once, briefly, when he came to collect a painting her mother had loved. He had smiled at Eliza as he carried it away, a smile that suggested he was enjoying her humiliation. And now she would have to entertain him, smile at him, pretend that his presence did not make her skin crawl. This was going to be harder than she had imagined. Dinner that first evening was a small affair, just Eliza and Sebastian in a dining room that could have seated 50, the candlelight flickering off silver and crystal as footmen moved silently between them. They spoke of practical matters, the guest list, the schedule of events, the particular sensitivities and preferences of each expected visitor. But as the meal progressed, the conversation began to shift into more personal territory. "You mentioned that your father was Earl of Ashbury," Sebastian said, refilling her wine-glass without asking. "I never had the pleasure of meeting him." "That is probably for the best." Eliza took a longer drink of wine than was strictly proper. "My father was charming, generous, loving, and entirely incapable of managing his affairs. He gambled away 3 generations of accumulated wealth in less than a decade, and left you to face the consequences." It was not a question, and Eliza did not answer it. Instead she asked, "What of your father? I have heard rumors." Sebastian's face closed like a door slamming shut. "My father was a cruel man who blamed me for my mother's death from the moment I drew my first breath. He spent my entire childhood reminding me that I had killed the only woman he ever loved. When he died, I felt nothing but relief." The words were delivered in a flat, emotionless tone that somehow made them more devastating. Eliza thought of the cold grandeur of Thornfield Manor, the stern portraits, the absence of any warmth or personal touch. She thought of a boy growing up in this vast, beautiful prison, blamed for a death he could not possibly have prevented. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be. It was years ago. Ancient history." But it wasn't, Eliza thought. Not really. The wounds we carry from childhood never fully heal. They simply scar over, hiding the pain beneath layers of armor until we almost forget it's there. She understood that better than most. "Tomorrow," Sebastian said, clearly eager to change the subject. "The guests begin arriving. Lord and Lady Ashford will be first, followed by the Countess of Rainford and her daughter. Lord Hartley and his party will arrive in the afternoon, along with Lord Hartley. Sebastian's eyes narrowed at the tone of her voice. You know him? He was one of my father's creditors. He purchased several paintings from the estate after... She could not finish the sentence. We have met. A long silence stretched between them. Then Sebastian said, in a voice of deadly softness, And this meeting was unpleasant? He was perfectly civil, perfectly correct. Eliza forced herself to meet his gaze, and he smiled at me as though my ruin was the most amusing thing he had witnessed in years. Something flickered in Sebastian's storm-grey eyes, something dangerous, something that made Eliza think of predators scenting blood. I see, he said quietly. Thank you for telling me. It doesn't matter. I am perfectly capable of... It matters. His voice was sharp enough to cut. Everything that concerns you matters for the duration of this arrangement. You are under my protection, Lady Whitmore. Anyone who offers you insult offers insult to me, and I do not forgive insults easily. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. This was not the cold, calculating duke she had met in London. This was something else entirely, a man whose walls had slipped, just for a moment, revealing the fire beneath. I can take care of myself, she said, more quietly than she had intended. I have no doubt of that. He leaned back, the mask sliding back into place. But for the next 3 weeks, you do not have to. That is the point of this arrangement, is it not? Eliza had no answer to that, so she simply raised her wine-glass, a silent toast to alliances and enemies, and the complicated dance they were about to begin. The guests arrived the next morning in a parade of carriages and chaos. First came Lord and Lady Ashford, political allies of Sebastian's, who greeted Eliza with genuine warmth and no apparent suspicion. Lady Ashford was a plump, cheerful woman who immediately took Eliza under her wing, filling her ears with gossip about the other guests and advice on how to manage the household. You must be firm with the kitchen, she confided as they walked through the gallery. Mrs. Henderson is a brilliant cook, but she can be temperamental, and make sure the footmen keep the fires built up in the library. Lord Rainford complains dreadfully about the cold. The Countess of Rainford and her daughter arrived next, both elegant and icy, their eyes assessing Eliza with thinly veiled condescension. The daughter, Lady Caroline, was a renowned beauty of 20, and it was immediately clear that she had set her sights on becoming the Duchess of Thornfield. "What an unusual arrangement," Lady Caroline said, her smile as sharp as a knife. "I was not aware that the Duke required a hostess. I would have been happy to offer my services." "How generous of you," Eliza replied smoothly. "But I'm sure you would prefer to enjoy the party as a guest, rather than troubling yourself with household matters." Lady Caroline's smile flickered, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. How thoughtful." It was a small victory, but Eliza savoured it nonetheless. And then, just as the afternoon light began to fade, Lord Hartley arrived. He had grown heavier in the 3 years since Eliza had last seen him, his florid face more deeply lined, his hair thinner and greyer. But his eyes were the same, small and calculating, gleaming with a malice that he barely bothered to conceal. "Lady Whitmore," he said, bowing over her hand with exaggerated courtesy. "What an unexpected pleasure. I had heard you were under the Duke's protection, but I confess I did not quite believe it." "Lord Hartley," Eliza kept her voice carefully neutral, "welcome to Thornfield." Such a gracious hostess. His eyes travelled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Your father would have been proud, though I suppose he would have been surprised to see you in such a elevated position, given the circumstances of your departure from society." "My father," Eliza said quietly, "is dead. I prefer not to speak of him." "Of course. How thoughtless of me. But he was smiling as he said it, that same smile he had worn as he carried away her mother's paintings. "I look forward to becoming better acquainted during my stay. I'm sure we have much to discuss." He moved past her into the house, and Eliza stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding with a mixture of fury and humiliation. "Lady Whitmore!" Sebastian's voice came from directly behind her, low and controlled. "I believe Lord Hartley requires a room on the north side of the house, the oldest wing. I understand the heating there is somewhat insufficient." Eliza turned to find him watching Lord Hartley's retreating back with an expression of cold calculation. Despite everything, she felt a smile tugging at her lips. "The north wing," she repeated. "Of course, Your Grace. I will inform Mrs. Blackwood immediately." "See that you do." His eyes met hers, and for just a moment she saw something warm beneath the ice. "No one speaks to my hostess that way. No one." And despite the churning anxiety in her stomach, despite the challenges that lay ahead, Eliza felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Protected. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, each one blurring into the next in a haze of menus and seating charts and the constant, exhausting performance of social grace. Eliza found, somewhat to her surprise, that she was good at this. The skills she had learned as an earl's daughter, skills she had thought useless in her, reduced circumstances served her well as the mistress of Thornfield Manor. She managed the household with quiet efficiency, smoothing over conflicts between guests, ensuring that each visitor felt welcomed and valued, keeping the complex machinery of the house party running smoothly. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the staff's attitude toward her began to shift. Mrs. Blackwood, who had greeted her with such cool skepticism, now consulted her on household matters with something approaching respect. The footman jumped to fulfill her requests. Even the temperamental cook seemed mollified by Eliza's thoughtful suggestions and genuine praise. "You have won them over," Sebastian observed one evening, finding her in the library after the other guests had retired. "My staff, I mean. They were prepared to despise you, and instead they are falling over themselves to please you. I am treating them with courtesy." Eliza set down the book she had been pretending to read. "It is not difficult. It is more difficult than you imagine. Most people in your position would see servants as beneath their notice. You remember their names. You ask about their families. You treat them as human beings rather than furniture. They are human beings. Yes." He moved closer, and the candlelight caught the silver threads in his dark hair. "That is precisely my point. You see people, Eliza, not ranks or positions or usefulness. People. It is a rare quality." Her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. They had been careful these past days to maintain a proper distance. But alone in the fire-lit library, with the rest of the house asleep, that distance seemed to shrink until it was almost nothing. "You see people too," she said quietly. "You simply pretend not to." His expression flickered. "What makes you say that?" "The flowers in my room. The way you ensured Lord Hartley's chamber would be uncomfortable without anyone being able to accuse you of impropriety. The fact that you know every servant by name, even though you pretend to be above such things." She held his gaze. "You want everyone to believe you are cold and unfeeling, but it is not true. It is armor, just like my invisibility was armor." For a long moment, Sebastian did not respond. Then slowly, he sank into the chair across from hers, his usual rigid posture softening slightly. "My father told me that love was weakness," he said, his voice low, "that my mother's love for me killed her, and that I should never make the same mistake. I grew up believing that caring for others was the surest path to destruction. And now?" He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen before: uncertainty, vulnerability. fear. Now I am beginning to wonder if he was wrong. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza felt her heart racing, felt the magnetic pull of him drawing her forward, felt the walls she had so carefully constructed beginning to crumble. Sebastian, we should retire. He stood abruptly, the mask sliding back into place. Tomorrow will be busy. The political negotiations begin in earnest, and I will need you to keep Lady Ashford occupied while I speak with her husband. The dismissal stung more than it should have. Of course, Eliza said, rising as well. Good night, Your Grace. She was at the door when his voice stopped her. Eliza. She turned back. He stood silhouetted against the firelight, his face in shadow. Thank you for everything. You have exceeded my expectations in every way. It was not a declaration. It was not an admission. But it was something. And as Eliza made her way through the darkened corridors to her room, she held those words close to her heart like a candle flame in the darkness. The incident with the riding accident happened 3 days later. It began as a simple morning ride. Sebastian and several of the gentlemen, including Lord Hartley, had planned an excursion to view the boundaries of the estate. Eliza was not invited, of course, but she stood at the window of the morning room and watched them depart, feeling an inexplicable anxiety that she could not quite name. 2 hours later, the party returned in chaos. Sebastian's horse had thrown him. That was the story the grooms told, their faces white with shock. The Duke had taken a jump badly unusual for a rider of his skill and had been unseated. He had landed hard, and for a terrible moment everyone thought he was dead. He was not dead. But he was injured, a broken rib, perhaps 2, and a gash on his forehead that had bled profusely before one of the grooms had bound it with his own cravat. He was conscious when they carried him into the house, conscious and furious, demanding to be set on his feet, insisting that he was perfectly fine, that everyone was making an absurd fuss over nothing. Eliza took one look at his grey face and the blood soaking through the makeshift bandage and took charge. "Bring him to his chambers," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Mrs. Blackwood, send for the doctor immediately. Sarah, I need hot water and clean linens. The rest of you, clear the hallway, now." No one questioned her. Perhaps it was the tone of her voice, or the look in her eyes, or simply the fact that someone needed to take control, and she was the only one doing so. Whatever the reason, they obeyed, and within minutes, Sebastian was installed in his chambers with Eliza at his side. "You are not a nurse," he said through gritted teeth, as she carefully unwound the blood-soaked cravat from his head. "You should not be quiet." She dipped a cloth in the basin of warm water Sarah had brought and began to clean the wound. It was deep, but not dangerously so, a jagged cut along his hairline that would leave a scar, but posed no threat to his life. "I have done this before. My father was thrown from horses more times than I can count. Now hold still." He held still, though she could feel the tension thrumming through him like a plucked string. This close, she could see every line of his face, every silver thread in his hair, every flutter of his pulse at his throat. His eyes were closed, his breath coming in careful, controlled intervals as she worked. "The jump was sabotaged," he said suddenly. Eliza's hands stilled. "What?" "Someone weakened the supports. I noticed it just before we reached it, but too late to pull up. If I had not shifted my weight at the last moment—" He opened his eyes, and they were blazing with cold fury. "Someone wanted me dead, Eliza, or at least seriously injured. Who would—" But even as she asked the question, she knew the answer. "Lord Hartley. Almost certainly. He has been trying to undermine my political alliances since we arrived, and he was conveniently positioned to suggest that particular route for our ride." Sebastian tried to sit up and immediately winced, pressing a hand to his ribs. "I cannot prove it, of course, but I know. You need to rest." Eliza pressed him gently back against the pillows. "The doctor will be here soon. We can discuss this later." "We will discuss it now." His hand caught hers, holding her in place. "If Hartley is willing to kill me to prevent the trade bill from passing, he will not hesitate to target you as well. You are my hostess, my ally, my—" He stopped abruptly, as if he had been about to say something he had not meant to reveal. "Your what?" Eliza asked quietly. For a long moment he did not answer. His hand was still wrapped around hers, warm and strong despite his injuries, and his eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "My weakness," he said finally. "You are my weakness, Eliza, and I do not know what to do about it." The admission hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its implications. Eliza felt her heart pounding in her chest, felt the world narrowing to this room, this moment, this man who was looking at her as though she held the answer to every question he had ever asked. "Sebastian," she whispered. And then the door burst open, and the doctor arrived, and the moment shattered like glass. Sebastian's injuries kept him confined to his chambers for 2 days. 2 days in which Eliza ran the house party with ruthless efficiency, managing the guests and the schedule and the political negotiations as though she had been born to it. 2 days in which she visited his sick room every evening, reading to him from books she found in the library, arguing with him about politics and philosophy, watching the color slowly return to his face. 2 days in which neither of them mentioned what he had said, but it hung between them, unspoken, changing everything. The careful distance they had maintained was gone. In its place was something else, a charged awareness, an electric tension that seemed to fill every room they shared. On the 3rd day, Sebastian emerged from his chambers, still moving stiffly but determined to resume his duties as host, and, that evening, after the other guests had retired, he found Eliza in the ballroom. She had not meant to come here, but her feet had carried her through the darkened corridors without conscious direction, and now she stood in the center of the vast, empty floor, remembering another ballroom, another night, a refusal that had changed everything. "May I have this dance?" His voice came from the doorway, low and warm and slightly rough from his injuries. Eliza turned to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart stutter. "There is no music," she said. "Then we will make our own." He crossed the floor to where she stood, moving slowly but surely, and held out his hand. Just as he had that night in London, just as he had when everything began. But this time, entirely, something that felt like surrender, like beginning, like coming home. They danced in silence, swaying gently in the moonlight that spilled through the tall windows. No music, no audience, no expectations. Just 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, learning to move together, learning to trust. "I am falling in love with you," Sebastian said quietly, his lips brushing her temple. "I have been fighting it since the moment you refused me at the Hartwell ball, but I am losing the battle." Eliza closed her eyes, leaning into him, feeling his heart beat against her cheek. "I know," she whispered. "I am losing it too." "What are we going to do?" It was not a proposal. It was not a declaration. It was a question, honest and vulnerable, and utterly unlike the cold, controlled Duke she had first met. "I don't know," she admitted, "but for tonight, can we just have this? Just this moment, just this dance? Tomorrow we can figure out the rest." His arms tightened around her, and she felt him nod against her hair. "Tonight," he agreed. "Just tonight." They danced until the moon set, and the first pale light of dawn began to creep across the floor. And then, reluctantly, they separated, returning to their own chambers, carrying with them the memory of what they had shared, and the terrifying hope of what might be to come. The crisis came 2 days later, at dinner. Lady Venetia Sinclair had arrived that afternoon, a last-minute addition to the guest list that Sebastian had not anticipated. She had swept into Thornfield with all the arrogance of a woman who believed herself the rightful mistress of the house, and her cold eyes had fixed on Eliza with unmistakable hatred. "The Duke's little hostess," she had said, her smile as sharp as cut glass. "How charming. I had heard rumors, of course, but I never imagined he would actually install you here. Lady Sinclair." Eliza had kept her voice carefully neutral. "How lovely to see you. I do hope your journey was pleasant." Now, as the guests gathered in the dining room for what was supposed to be a celebratory dinner marking the successful conclusion of Sebastian's political negotiations, Lady Venetia struck. "I do think it is admirable," she announced to the table at large, her voice carrying clearly above the clink of crystal and silverware, "the way the Duke has taken such pity on the less fortunate. This entire house party has been organized by a woman who is not even a proper guest, merely a poor relation of the disgraced Earl of Ashbury, playing at being mistress of a house that will never be hers." The silence that followed was absolute. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face as every eye in the room turned to her. This was it. The moment she had dreaded since she first agreed to this arrangement. Her secret was out, her disguise stripped away, her shame laid bare for all to see. "Lady Sinclair!" Sebastian's voice was ice. "I suggest you reconsider your remarks." "Why should I?" Lady Venetia's smile was triumphant. "It is all true, is it not? Lady Whitmore's father died in disgrace, his debts so profound that everything was sold to pay them. She is not your cousin, as you have implied. She is nobody. Nothing. A penniless woman trading on what few charms she possesses to secure a temporary position in your household." "That is quite enough." Sebastian rose to his feet, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You will apologize to Lady Whitmore immediately, or you will leave this house." "Apologize? For speaking the truth?" Lady Venetia laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "My dear Duke, everyone at this table deserves to know who they have been associating with. The daughter of a suicide, the woman whose own fiancé abandoned her when he learned of her disgrace, the woman I love." The words fell into the silence like stones into a still pond. Eliza's heart stopped. Every guest at the table froze in place. Sebastian stood at the head of his ancestral table, his storm-grey eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to light the room. He was not looking at Lady Venetia. He was looking at Eliza. "I love her," he repeated, his voice steady and sure. "I love her courage, her honesty, her refusal to be diminished by circumstances that would have broken a lesser woman. I love that she refused to dance with me when everyone else would have swooned at my feet. I love that she sees through my walls and cares for me anyway. And I will not stand here and allow anyone to speak of her with disrespect." Lady Venetia's face had gone white. "You cannot be serious. She is nobody. A fortune hunter. She is the woman I am going to marry." Sebastian's gaze never wavered from Eliza's face. "If she will have me." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. But Eliza heard none of it. She was on her feet, her heart pounding, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the man she loved, the man who had just declared himself before all of society, who had thrown away his reputation and his pride to defend her honor. "Sebastian," she whispered, "tell me to stop." His voice was rough with emotion. "Tell me you don't feel the same, and I will never speak of it again. But I had to tell you. I had to tell everyone. I am done hiding. I am done pretending that this is merely an arrangement. I love you, Eliza Whitmore. I have loved you since the moment you told me no." Later, Eliza would not remember crossing the room to him. She would not remember the shocked faces of the guests, Lady Venetia's furious departure, Lord Hartley's poisonous glare. She would only remember reaching Sebastian's side, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the tremor that ran through him at her touch. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will have you. Yes, I love you. Yes." And when he kissed her, there in front of everyone, she finally understood what it meant to be truly seen. But the evening was not over. After the guests had been ushered to the drawing-room, most of them still reeling from the unexpected proposal, Sebastian drew Eliza into the library for a private moment. "I should not have declared myself so publicly," he said, his voice rough. "I should have asked you properly, privately, before you should have." She smiled up at him through her tears. "It was wildly improper, thoroughly scandalous, and the most romantic thing anyone has ever done for me." "Then you are not angry?" "I am furious." She rose on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. "And I have never been happier in my life." He gathered her into his arms, holding her close, and for a long moment they simply breathed together in the fire-lit darkness. "There is still Lord Hartley to deal with," Sebastian murmured against her hair, "and the political negotiations are not yet complete, and half of society will consider this match a scandal. I know, and I am difficult and cold, and I have spent my entire life learning how not to love. I know that too." He pulled back slightly, looking down at her with an expression of such tender wonder that it made her heart ache. "And yet you will marry me anyway." "I refused you once," Eliza said, smiling. "I think I have earned the right to accept you now." "On your own terms. Always on my own terms." He laughed, that rare, genuine sound that she had come to treasure, and kissed her again. And as the fire crackled and the night deepened around them, Eliza thought that perhaps, after all, the refusal that had ruined her had saved her instead. But later that night, when Eliza returned to her chambers, she found Lord Hartley waiting in the corridor. "A touching scene," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The disgraced Earl's daughter, risen from the ashes to capture a duke. Your father would have admired the strategy. He always did appreciate a good gamble. Get out of my way." "Not yet." He stepped closer, and his eyes glittered with malice. "You think you have won, but I know things about your father, Lady Whitmore. Things that could destroy this fairy tale you have constructed." Eliza's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Your father did not merely gamble away his fortune. He stole from his creditors, forged documents, ruined men who trusted him." Lord Hartley smiled. "I have proof, and I wonder, how will the Duke feel about marrying the daughter of a common criminal?" He pressed a folded paper into her hands and walked away, leaving Eliza standing alone in the darkened corridor, her happiness crumbling to dust. She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, and what she saw there made her heart shatter. It was true, all of it. Her father had not merely been reckless, he had been criminal. He had destroyed lives, stolen fortunes, built their comfortable existence on a foundation of fraud and deception. Everything she believed about him, everything she had clung to in the years since his death, was a lie. And if this came out, if society learned the truth, it would not only destroy her, it would destroy Sebastian as well. The political alliances he had worked so hard to build, the reputation he had risked to defend her, the proposal he had made so publicly, all of it would be ruined. She could not let that happen. Eliza stood in the darkness for a long time, the damning paper clutched in her hand, tears streaming silently down her face. And then, Slowly, she made her way to her chambers and began to pack. She would leave at dawn, before Sebastian woke, before she could weaken and change her mind. She would sacrifice her happiness to save him from the scandal her father had created, and perhaps in time he would understand. It was the hardest decision she had ever made. But as she folded her few possessions into a valise, as she wrote a letter explaining everything and sealed it with trembling fingers, as she prepared to walk away from the only man she had ever loved, Eliza could not bring herself to regret any of it. She had learned to be invisible once. She could learn again, even if it broke her heart. The hour before dawn was the coldest, the darkest, the most silent. Eliza moved through it like a ghost, her valise clutched in one hand, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She had not slept. How could she, when every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sebastian's face as he declared his love before all of society? The vulnerability in his storm-grey eyes, the tremor in his voice, the way he had looked at her as though she were the answer to every prayer he had never dared to speak. She had spent the night alternating between weeping and packing, between resolve and despair, between the desperate hope that she was wrong and the crushing certainty that she was not. Lord Hartley's document lay folded in her pocket, a poison pressed against her heart. She had read it a dozen times, searching for some error, some exaggeration, some sign that it was a forgery designed to manipulate her. But the handwriting was unmistakably her father's. The details were too specific, too damning, too consistent with the whispered rumors she had always refused to believe. Her father had not merely been a reckless gambler. He had been a thief, a forger, a man who had ruined others to fund his own pleasures. The comfortable life she remembered, the beautiful gowns and lavish parties and summers at the country estate, all of it had been built on stolen money and broken lives. And if the truth came out, it would destroy everything Sebastian had built. Eliza could not allow that. She loved him too much to watch him fall because of her. The corridor was dark and empty as she made her way toward the servants' stairs. She had planned her route carefully through the back passages, out the kitchen door, down the lane to the village where she could hire a coach to take her somewhere, anywhere, away from here. She had left her letter on her pillow, explaining everything, begging Sebastian not to follow, not to fight for her, not to sacrifice his future for a woman whose very name was poison. She was halfway down the stairs when a voice stopped her cold. "Going somewhere?" Sebastian stood at the bottom of the staircase, still dressed in his evening clothes, his hair dishevelled and his eyes burning with an intensity that made her heart stutter. He looked as though he had not slept either, as though he had been waiting for her, watching for her, knowing somehow that she would try to run. "Sebastian." Her voice came out as a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I might ask you the same question." He climbed the stairs slowly, deliberately, his gaze never leaving her face. "It is not yet 5 o'clock in the morning. You are dressed for travel. You are carrying a valise, and you are attempting to leave through the servants' entrance." I can explain." "Can you?" He stopped one step below her, close enough that she could smell the sandalwood of his cologne, see the lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. "Then by all means. Explain why the woman who agreed to marry me last night is attempting to flee my house before dawn." Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Please, just let me go. It is better this way. You will understand when you read my letter." "I have already read your letter." The words fell like stones into still water. Eliza stared at him, uncomprehending. "What? How? I went to your chambers an hour ago. I could not sleep, and I wanted—" He stopped, something raw flickering across his face. "I found your room empty, and your letter on the pillow. I have been waiting here ever since." "Then you know—" Her voice cracked. "You know what my father did, what I am. You know that if this comes out, It will destroy you, your alliances, everything you have worked for. I know that Lord Hartley is a manipulative bastard who would say anything to drive us apart. Sebastian's voice was hard. I know that he gave you a document designed to make you believe the worst about your father and yourself. And I know that you were prepared to sacrifice everything, your happiness, our future, the love we have only just admitted to each other, to protect me from a scandal that may not even exist. It does exist. Eliza fumbled in her pocket, pulling out the crumpled document. Look at it. Look at my father's handwriting. He confesses to everything, the forgeries, the thefts, the men he ruined. This is not a fabrication. This is the truth. Sebastian took the document from her trembling fingers. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the contents with the same cold, analytical expression he wore when conducting business negotiations. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, deliberately, he tore the paper in half. Eliza gasped. "What are you doing?" "Destroying evidence." He tore it again and again, until the document was nothing but confetti drifting down the staircase like dark snow. Evidence that Lord Hartley obtained through means I do not care to imagine, and presented to you in a deliberate attempt to destroy our happiness. But it was real. It was your father's handwriting, yes, and perhaps every word of it was true. Sebastian's eyes met hers, and in them she saw not the cold calculation she expected, but something fierce and tender and utterly certain. "Do you think I care?" "How can you not care? If this becomes public, then I will weather the scandal. I have weathered worse." He took her hands in his, and she felt the warmth of him seep through her cold fingers, like sunlight through clouds. "Eliza, listen to me. My father was a cruel, bitter man who blamed an innocent child for his wife's death. My grandfather was a notorious rake who squandered half the family fortune on mistresses and gambling debts. My great-uncle was tried for treason and only escaped the noose through political connections. The Ashworth family tree is riddled with scandals, crimes, and moral failures of every description. That is different. How? How is it different?" His grip on her hands tightened. "You are not your father, Eliza. You are not responsible for his sins. The fact that he made terrible choices does not diminish your worth by one iota. And if society chooses to judge you for crimes you did not commit, then society can go hang." A sob escaped her throat. "But your political alliances, the trade bill, everything you worked for, means nothing if I lose you." His voice was raw, stripped of every defense, every wall, every piece of armor he had ever worn. "Do you understand? Nothing in my life has ever mattered the way you matter. Not Thornfield, not my fortune, not my political ambitions. If I have to choose between being a duke and being your husband, I choose you. I will always choose you." Eliza stared at him through her tears, seeing the truth of his words written across his face. This was not the cold, calculating man she had met at the Hartwell ball. This was a man transformed, a man who had spent his entire life believing himself incapable of love, and had discovered, against all expectations, that he was capable of nothing else. "I was trying to protect you," she whispered. "I know, and I love you for it." He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "But I do not need your protection, Eliza. I need your presence. I need your honesty. I need you to stop running away and start running toward something instead." "Toward what?" "Toward us." His eyes held hers, grey and silver and burning with a light she had never seen in them before. "Toward a future neither of us ever imagined we could have." toward a life where we face whatever comes together side by side, neither of us alone, ever again. The valise slipped from her nerveless fingers, tumbling down the stairs to land at the bottom with a soft thud. Eliza barely noticed. She was looking at Sebastian, at the face of the man she loved, at the future he was offering her with both hands. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "So am I." He smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "But I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you." She laughed a broken, tearful sound, and threw herself into his arms. He caught her, held her, pressed his face into her hair, and breathed her in as though she were the air he needed to survive. They stood there on the servants' staircase as the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck who had finally reached shore. "Do not ever try to leave me again," Sebastian murmured against her temple. "I am serious, Eliza. If you have concerns, if you have fears, if Lord Hartley or anyone else threatens you, you come to me. We face it together. That is what marriage means. We are not married yet. A technicality I intend to remedy as soon as possible." He pulled back slightly, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart flutter. "Will you marry me, Eliza Whitmore? Not because I declared myself at dinner, not because society expects it, not because you have no other options, but because you love me, and I love you, and neither of us is willing to live without the other." "Yes." The word came easily now, without hesitation, without fear. "Yes, I will marry you. Today, if you like." Today might be slightly ambitious. His lips curved into a smile. "But I believe I can arrange something within the week." And when he kissed her, there on the staircase with the dawn breaking around them, Eliza finally understood what it meant to be truly home. Lord Hartley departed Thornfield that morning. He did not depart quietly. Sebastian had summoned him to the study at first light, and what passed between them Eliza never learned in full. But she heard fragments through the door Sebastian's voice, cold and deadly, outlining in precise detail every piece of information he had gathered about Lord Hartley's own financial irregularities, his questionable business dealings, his attempts to sabotage the riding expedition. "The jump was tampered with," she heard Sebastian say, his tone flat, with controlled fury. "I have sworn statements from 2 grooms who witnessed you near the course the evening before. I have documents proving that you have been embezzling from your own estates for years. And I have testimony from Lady Sinclair herself, who was only too happy to reveal your involvement in her scheme once she realized you had abandoned her to face my wrath alone." Lord Hartley's response was inaudible, but Sebastian's reply was perfectly clear. "You will leave my house within the hour. You will return to London and withdraw from society for the foreseeable future. You will never speak to or about Lady Whitmore again. And if I hear so much as a whisper of the lies you attempted to spread, I will destroy you so completely that your own children will not recognize your name." When Lord Hartley emerged from the study, his face was grey and his hands were shaking. He did not look at Eliza as he passed her in the corridor. He did not look at anyone. He simply collected his belongings and fled, and Thornfield seemed to breathe a sigh of relief at his departure. "What will happen to him?" Eliza asked when Sebastian emerged from the study. "Nothing he does not deserve." Sebastian's expression softened as he looked at her. "The document he gave you, it may have been genuine, but the circumstances of how he obtained it were certainly not. Your father's papers were sealed by the courts after his death. Hartley bribed a clerk to access them, seeking anything he could use as leverage. He has been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. But why? What did he hope to gain? Power, influence, the satisfaction of destroying something I valued." Sebastian took her hands, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her palm. Men like Hartley cannot bear to see others succeed where they have failed. Your father ruined him financially years ago, legitimately, as it happens, in a business dealing that Hartley himself initiated. He has been nursing that grudge ever since, and when he saw an opportunity to hurt both of us at once, he took it. He took it, and he failed. Sebastian raised her hands to his lips once more. As he was always going to fail, because he underestimated both of us. He thought you would run. He thought I would let you go. He was wrong on both counts. Eliza leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. And my father, the things in that document may or may not be true. We will likely never know for certain. His voice was gentle. But I meant what I said on the staircase, Eliza. Whatever your father did or did not do, it does not define you. You are your own person, with your own choices, your own integrity, your own worth. Nothing he did can change that. She nodded slowly, feeling something loosen in her chest, some knot of shame and fear that had been tied there since her father's death. Perhaps she would never know the full truth about him. Perhaps some mysteries were better left unsolved. But Sebastian was right. She was not her father. She was not defined by his choices. She was Eliza Whitmore, and she was finally ready to stop hiding. The wedding took place 5 days later in the chapel at Thornfield, a small, ancient building that had been part of the estate for 300 years. It was not the grand society affair that London would have expected. There were no 200 guests in their finest silks, no elaborate decorations, no newspaper announcements designed to trumpet the union of a duke and his chosen duchess. There was only the chapel, with its medieval stonework and stained glass windows filtering the afternoon light into patterns of gold and rose and deep blue. There were only 24 guests, the Ashfords, a few other political allies who had proven themselves true friends, the household staff who had grown to love their new mistress. There was only Sebastian, standing at the altar in a dark blue coat that matched his eyes, watching Eliza walk toward him with an expression of such profound wonder that she nearly wept. And there was Eliza herself, wearing a gown of ivory silk that Sebastian had commissioned from London's finest modiste, her copper hair threaded with tiny white flowers, her mother's pearls around her throat. The pearls had arrived the morning after her attempted flight, delivered to her chambers in a velvet box with a note in Sebastian's handwriting. These were sold to pay your father's debts. I have purchased them back. They belong to you, as they always should have. She had wept then, truly wept, for the first time since her father's death. Not from grief, but from the overwhelming realization that she was loved truly, deeply, completely loved by a man who saw all of her darkness and chose her anyway. Now, as she reached the altar and placed her hand in Sebastian's, she felt that love like a warmth spreading through her entire body. His fingers closed around hers, strong and sure, and his eyes met hers with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "You came," he murmured, too low for anyone else to hear. "Did you doubt me?" "Never for a moment." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "But I am still grateful." The ceremony was simple, the words ancient and sacred. They spoke their vows in voices that only occasionally trembled, and when Sebastian slid the ring onto her finger, a band of gold set with a single perfect emerald that matched her eyes, Eliza felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. She was married, she was loved, she was home. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, when Sebastian drew her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made several of the older guests cough disapprovingly, Eliza knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along, not invisibility, not safety, not the careful, diminished existence she had accepted after her father's death. She had found herself. The wedding night was everything she had imagined, and nothing she had expected. Sebastian had given orders that they were not to be disturbed under any circumstances, and the suite of rooms he led her to the Duchess's chambers, connected to his own by a private door, had been transformed into a bower of candlelight and flowers. "This is too much," Eliza breathed, looking around at the rose petals scattered across the bed, the champagne chilling in a silver bucket, the fire crackling warmly in the hearth. "Nothing is too much for you." Sebastian stood behind her, his hands coming up to rest on her shoulders, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of her neck. "Not any more. Not ever again." She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, the face of her husband, the face of the man she loved. In the candlelight, his storm-grey eyes were soft, almost vulnerable, stripped of every defense he had ever worn. "I love you," she said. "I did not say it enough before. I was too afraid. But I love you, Sebastian. I love your arrogance and your coldness, and the way you pretend not to care when you care so deeply it frightens you. I love that you cleared a ballroom because I refused to dance with you. I love that you tore up Lord Hartley's document without a moment's hesitation. I love—" He kissed her then, cutting off her words, and the kiss was fierce and tender and full of promise. His hands moved to the buttons at the back of her gown, undoing them with a patience that belied the hunger she could feel trembling through him. "Tell me if I go too fast," he murmured against her lips. "Tell me if you want me to stop. I will never want you to stop." And she did not. The hours that followed were a revelation, a journey of discovery that left them both breathless and transformed. Sebastian was patient and passionate by turns, guiding her through the unfamiliar landscape of desire with a tenderness that made her weep. And Eliza, who had spent so long hiding herself away, finally allowed herself to be seen, completely, wholly, without reservation. When they lay together afterward, tangled in sheets that smelled of roses and satisfaction, Sebastian traced lazy patterns across her bare shoulder and spoke words he had never spoken to anyone. "I was afraid I would never have this," he admitted. "A wife, a family, a life that was not merely power and politics and endless cold ambition. My father convinced me that love was weakness, and I believed him for so long that I did not know I was capable of anything else." Eliza turned to look at him. Her hair spread across the pillow like a copper wave. "What changed?" "You." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the truth of everything he was. "You refused me. You challenged me. You saw through every wall I had built and cared for what you found beneath. You taught me that vulnerability is not weakness. It is the only path to genuine connection." "I was terrified," she confessed. "Every moment we spent together I was terrified that you would realize I was not worthy of you. Not worthy of me." He laughed, a sound of genuine wonder. "Eliza, I am the one who is not worthy. You have more courage in your smallest finger than I have in my entire body. You faced down society, faced down your own aunt, faced down Lord Hartley and Lady Sinclair, and everyone who tried to diminish you. You refused a duke because you would not be made a pawn. And you cleared a ballroom because you refused to accept no for an answer." "In my defense," he said, a smile tugging at his lips, "I was trying to have a conversation. You were being insufferably arrogant. Guilty." He kissed her softly. "But it worked, did it not?" Eliza smiled against his lips. "It worked," she agreed, "though I maintain that you are the most arrogant man I have ever met. And you love me anyway. And I love you anyway. God help me. They made love again as the candles burned low, and then again as dawn crept through the windows. And when they finally slept, wrapped in each other's arms, Eliza dreamed of nothing at all. For the first time in years, she did not need dreams. Reality was finally enough. 8 years later. Thornfield Manor in summer was a different place entirely from the cold, austere house Eliza had first encountered on that grey afternoon so many years ago. The windows stood open, letting in the warm breeze and the scent of roses from the garden. The corridors that had once echoed with silence now rang with the sound of children's laughter. The formal rooms that had been designed to intimidate rather than welcome had been transformed piece by piece into spaces of warmth and life. And the woman who walked through them was no longer the invisible, diminished creature who had clung to the walls of ballrooms, hoping not to be seen. Eliza, Duchess of Thornfield, moved through her domain with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place through transformation rather than birth. At 32, she was more beautiful than she had been at 24. Not because time had been particularly kind, but because she had finally learned to carry herself like someone who mattered. "Mamma! Mamma! Charlotte hit me!" The voice echoed down the corridor, followed by the thundering of small feet and the appearance of 2 children, a girl of 7, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, and a boy of 5 with copper curls and a stubborn set to his jaw that Eliza recognized from her own mirror. "I did not hit him," Charlotte announced, her expression a perfect miniature of Sebastian's at his most imperious. "I merely pushed him. There is a difference." "There is not a difference when you are pushing your brother into the lake," came a deeper voice, and Sebastian emerged from the garden door with their youngest child in his arms, a girl of barely 2, drowsy from the heat, her dark curls plastered to her flushed cheeks. "She pushed me into the shallow part," William protested. "I was hardly even wet." "You were extremely wet," Charlotte said, "and you deserved it. You called me a name. I called you Charlotte. That is your name. You called me Charlotte the Horrible, and you know it. Enough!" Eliza held up a hand, and both children fell silent immediately. Even at 7 and 5, they had learned that their mother's quiet authority was not to be tested. "Charlotte, you will apologize to your brother for pushing him into the lake, regardless of what he called you. William, you will apologize to your sister for calling her names, and both of you will go to the nursery and change into dry clothes before cook serves tea." "But, Mamma, now." The children exchanged glances, recognized the futility of argument, and retreated toward the staircase with only minimal grumbling. Eliza watched them go, a smile tugging at her lips despite her stern expression. "Charlotte the Horrible," Sebastian murmured, shifting their youngest daughter to his other arm. "I wonder where she gets that imperious streak." "I have absolutely no idea," Eliza replied innocently. "Certainly not from her father, who once cleared an entire ballroom because he did not receive the answer he wanted. That was different." "How?" "I was trying to court you. Charlotte is merely terrorizing her brother for sport." But he was smiling as he said it, and when he leaned down to kiss her, Eliza felt the same flutter of joy she had felt on their wedding night, unchanged by time. Little Sophia stirred in his arms, blinking sleepily. "Mamma?" "Hello, my darling." Eliza brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Did you have a nice nap?" "Papa read me a story." "Did he? What story?" "The one about the princess who refused to dance with the prince." Sophia yawned hugely. "Papa says that's how you and he fell in love." Eliza met Sebastian's eyes over their daughter's head, and something warm and private passed between them. "Your papa," she said, "is a very wise man." "I try." Sebastian's free hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. Though I believe I may have simplified the narrative somewhat for our youngest audience member. You left out the part where you cleared the ballroom? I left out several parts. She is only 2. There will be time for the full story when she is older. His eyes softened. When she is old enough to understand that love is not about grand gestures, but about the small moments, the daily choices. The decision to stay when leaving would be easier. Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes. Happy tears, the kind she had never imagined she would shed. 8 years of marriage, and Sebastian could still move her with a handful of words. "I love you," she said. "Have I told you that today?" "Only twice. I was beginning to worry." She laughed and leaned into him, their daughter drowsing between them, and looked out the window at the gardens, where their older children were now running through the roses, their quarrel apparently forgotten. Life at Thornfield was not always peaceful. Charlotte had inherited her father's temper along with his colouring. William had his grandfather's reckless streak, which terrified Eliza on a regular basis, and Sophia, sweet as she was, had already demonstrated a talent for manipulation that would serve her well in society. But it was a life, a real life, a life Eliza had never dared to imagine during those dark years of invisibility and shame. "What are you thinking?" Sebastian asked, watching her face. "I am thinking that I am happy." She looked up at him, memorizing the lines of his face, the silver that now threaded more heavily through his dark hair, the creases at the corners of his eyes that had not been there 8 years ago, the softness in his expression that she alone was permitted to see. "I am thinking that I spent so many years believing I did not deserve happiness, that it was something that happened to other people, not to me, and now I have more of it than I know what to do with. You deserve every moment of it." He kissed her forehead gently. "And more besides." "So do you." "I know." A hint of his old arrogance flickered in his smile. "I am the Duke of Thornfield. I deserve everything. And so humble about it. Humility is overrated." But his eyes were warm with laughter, and when he kissed her again, Eliza felt the years fall away until they were once more 2 people on a staircase at dawn, learning to believe in something neither of them had ever expected to find. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into its quiet nighttime rhythms, Eliza found Sebastian in the portrait gallery. She had known she would find him here. It was where he came when he wanted to think, when the weight of the past pressed too heavily against him. The gallery had changed over the years, no longer a cold, forbidding space filled with stern-faced ancestors, but something warmer, more personal. He stood before the portrait of his mother, as he often did. But tonight, his attention was not on the painted image of the woman who had died giving him life. It was on the portrait beside it, the one he had commissioned 3 years ago, after Sophia's birth. Eliza and the children, captured in oils and light. Charlotte standing tall and proud, her hand resting on William's shoulder. William looking slightly rumpled as he always did, but happy. And Eliza herself, seated with infant Sophia in her arms, her green eyes bright, her expression full of a joy that the artist had somehow managed to capture perfectly. "I used to hate this gallery," Sebastian said without turning around. "All these portraits of people who came before me, watching and judging, reminding me of everything I could never be." Eliza moved to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "And now? Now I understand what they represent." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw the man he had become. Not cold, not closed off, not armored against the world, but open and vulnerable and utterly unafraid. A legacy, a lineage, A story that did not end with any of them, but continues through all of us, through our children, through whatever children they may one day have. That is a long way to think ahead. I am a duke. Thinking ahead is my profession. But his smile was gentle as he drew her closer. I used to believe that love was weakness, that caring for someone gave them power over you. My father taught me that lesson every day of my childhood, and I believed him because I had no evidence to the contrary. And now? Now I know he was wrong. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Love is not weakness. It is strength. The strength to be vulnerable. The strength to risk everything for someone else's happiness. The strength to keep choosing, every day, to stay. Eliza leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. You have become quite the philosopher in your old age, Your Grace. I have had an excellent teacher. Who? A woman I met at a ball. His voice was low, intimate, full of memory. She refused to dance with me. She was utterly unimpressed by my title and my fortune. She saw through every wall I had ever built and loved what she found beneath. She sounds remarkable. She is. He kissed her softly. She is the most remarkable person I have ever known. And every day I wake up grateful that I was arrogant enough to clear that ballroom, because otherwise I might never have known her. Eliza opened her eyes, looking up at the man she loved, her husband, the father of her children, the partner who had walked beside her through 8 years of joy and challenge and growth. Dance with me, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Here. Now? Why not? There is no music, but we have never needed music. She stepped back, holding out her hand in a mirror of that night so long ago. Dance with me, Sebastian. He took her hand, drew her into his arms, and they danced, there in the portrait gallery, surrounded by the painted eyes of generations past and the living love of generations to come. They danced without music, without witnesses, without anything but each other, and the moonlight spilling through the tall windows. I love you, Eliza whispered against his chest. I have loved you since the moment you asked me why I refused you, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you. His arms tightened around her. My stubborn, brave, beautiful wife. My duchess. My heart. They danced until the moon set, and the first pale light of dawn began to touch the horizon. And then, hand in hand, they walked through the quiet house, pausing to check on sleeping children, to adjust a blanket here and close a window there until they reached their chambers. There, in the warmth of the room they had shared for 8 years, with the fire crackling and the bed inviting, and the whole of their lives stretched out before them, Sebastian pulled Eliza close one final time. I have a confession to make, he said. Oh? That night at the Hartwell ball, when you refused me, I was not merely intrigued, I was terrified. Eliza laughed softly. Terrified? You? Terrified. He nodded seriously. Because in that moment when you looked at me and said no, I felt something I had never felt before, something that made me realize every wall I had ever built was meaningless, something that made me understand I had been living half a life, and you were the only one who could make it whole. You have never told me that before. I have never been brave enough. His eyes held hers, grey and silver and full of love. But I am brave now. You made me brave. You make me brave every single day, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift. Eliza reached up and kissed him slowly, tenderly, with all the love she had never believed she would find, and all the joy she had never dared to hope for. "You are already worthy," she said. "You always were. You just needed someone to show you." And as they came together in the soft light of dawn, Eliza thought about the girl she had been 8 years ago, the invisible girl, clinging to ballroom walls, believing herself diminished and worthless and undeserving of love. That girl had been wrong about everything. Because she had been seen, she had been chosen. She had been loved, not despite her flaws and her past and her fears, but because of them. And she was finally, irrevocably, completely home.